Okay. Okay, so what I want to show you here, this is, and I would say about a third of you guys did this. One of the issues that I've got with this is that, oh great, oh sorry, can't pass it back that way. So about, like I said, about a third of you actually did the path work, then created a selection from it, and then filled that selection with red, which it wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but you can see that it's where she filled this is actually the layer that's got the outline on it. So I've kind of lost that outline. So I can sort of get it back. So this is how welcome to my hell. This is how I grade. So I'm just going to open up anyone else's. So this is just Stephanie's right here. She's got a version of this on it. So I'm just simply going to click and drag her layer of the outline on top of Haley's. Hold down the shift key. It'll come in and register. And now I've got actually both, and I can get rid of the other one. But the issue that I want to bring up in here in all of this is that, again, this is one of those instances where if someone had to go back in time to the original file, it's not here. And not that you couldn't find it somewhere else, but it's just a way of thinking about working. You never want to actually bury yourself like that. So then if we take a look at the path, so I'm going to kick out of here. The easiest way for me to see the quality of the path is to use the direct selection tool, and I'll simply select across it. First make it active, click and select across it, and then zoom in and take a look to see how things are really going in here. And you can see that there's some issues in here. There's like mistakes that are actually happening in here. I just want to tell you that a lot of people, when they're doing their pen work, whatever, they blow through an exercise just like this, and they're really cavalier about this. They don't try to get their points right on mark. Their intention is that to just do an outline really, really quickly and then come back in and refine everything after the fact. That to me seems really stupid, because in doing it that way, you've got to pass through, you got to do 2 passes at least through all of your work. And it's like, why do that? The other problem that we run into is that there are certain points that we cannot correct without going into all of these other points. Remember, I told you all these other points that are underneath your pen tool, all the add, anchor, delete, all that kind of shit. I told you, I promised you I would avoid all of that for you to make this tool something simple that you could use. If we have to then go back in and start to edit all of these points, you need to learn all this shit. So don't do that. Just make it right the first go through. It's so much easier to, if you make a mistake, to just say Command Z to undo it and then do it correctly, and then at the end of the day you've got your path is perfect and everything's great. But at any rate, you can actually do some editing on this stuff after the fact. To do that, you want to use the white arrow, not the black arrow. The black arrow path selection tool will select the entire path. It's how you would move an entire path, or well, it's how you move an entire path. If we want to move single points, we want to edit single points, it's got to be the white arrow that we use to do this. So I'm going to click on this first point right here, and you can see that the first thing I can do is, you'll see everybody else, all the other points are white. This one is blue, meaning when I move it, it's the only one who actually moves. So I'm going to anchor it a little bit more on the line, and then I can also use the handles. I can edit the handles still using the white tool. So I'm going to click on the white tool right here, and I can actually tweak this out. So this is now the change in this, and you can see this is now running along the path. The same thing will happen in here. I can actually goose this up to point where it actually should be. This point is actually, the curve needs to be tricked out a little bit more. This one, the curve needs to be tricked out a little bit more. But so you can see you can edit this stuff after the fact. So I just wanted to point that part out. I'm going to close this up. So in Caroline's, this, there was a problem in this, but it came really from the setup in the beginning. if you actually take a look at the entire set of layers that are happening in here, you'll see that everything is listed as a shape. When you actually use the pen tool, so I'm going to again hit the P key. Again, the setup was the only problem right here. There's a drop-down menu up at the very top, and this allows you to create either paths or shapes. Now, the confusing part about this is that a shape itself right here, if you see one of these, is actually a path. But instead of saving all of this to your path palette and working with it on here, it's all saved as what they call individual shape layers. And you can see if we actually pick one of these, well, I'm actually going to just do one. I'm going to create it as a shape. And we'll go up to the very top. Okay, pen tool, shape layer right here. This is what happens. So I'm going to start, hang on one second. I'm going to make my foreground color something visible so you'll be able to see this a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to start here and I'm going to click to do my first arc in here like this, whatever. And you should see this. It starts to actually fill. There's a thickness of a line here that's actually going on it, and then it actually starts to fill with your foreground color, and this continues to happen in here. So it still is working, it still is building a path, but this whole shape thing treats this as layers, and then again, it's not only doing layers, but it's also filling the path, and then it's also stroking the path. So you see this stroke line right here. This is actually set at 5 pixels. I'm going to drop it down to 1 pixel, and you'll see that the entire shape layer part, the outline has actually gotten much more narrow. So it's just a completely different animal, I guess is all I'm really trying to say. So the only problem in this was the setup. Again, you want to make sure that you're doing paths and not shapes in this. So I just wanted to point that part out. I want to show you one of Christiana's. So this is the same problem in that the path is actually pretty well done. If we take a look at this, I'm going to zoom into here. I mean, you can't really see too much of the line. You see a little bit of the line right here. But when it got filled with the red, you sort of like lose the outline. So that was destructive to begin with. But then it looks like here she also then loaded it as a selection, put it on here as a layer mask, and then removed the mask and said you wanted to apply the layer mask. That is a destructive move. So if there was anything in this area that you didn't hit perfectly, there's a chance, 50-50 chance, you've actually lost this information. Not only were people doing this on these outlines, people were doing it on all of the other assignments in this. And I don't know why you or how or who taught you guys to apply masks, but there is no reason to ever apply a mask, ever. You do not need to do that. The work you're doing with the mask does the same thing. So I want to show you what I mean by apply the path. So I'm going to open Stephanie's again really quickly just because it's intact here. I'm going to close this up. So if you wanted to do all the moves that people were doing, I'll show you exactly the way I would do it. So if we go to the path, make the path active, hover over the thumbnail, click to load it as a selection, go back into the path. Again, this is the layer right here that's got the outline on it. You do not want to do this to the outline. So I'm going to create a separate layer right here. Red is my foreground color. I have an active selection going. Option delete fills it. Command D to deselect, and I'm good to go. And I've got everything. So I don't have the Coca-Cola part or this. So actually, now I'm beginning to realize what may have happened here. So that's the way you would actually want to do it. The way you don't want to do it, it would be this. So I'm going to go back in history to where we actually did the selection. This is the layer that's got the outline on it. I'm going to go ahead and apply that to that now. Command D to deselect. And you can see this is now a destructive move. I've combined this red with the outline. Making things worse, I'm going to go back. So I've still got the marching ants right here. Would be if you added a layer mask to this. So adding the layer mask makes the whole background transparent. And if this is your goal, this is fine. Just leave it at this stage right now. But what people seem to be doing across the board is that once you get it to this part, then you drag the, again, if I hide this, you can see I've got a white background, I've got the red type on it, I've got the outline, but when I have the mask showing, it appears, again, the black area of the mask is hiding all of that white background. But if I click the mask and drag it to the trash, it offers to either apply the mask, delete the mask, or cancel this move. So if I hit cancel, it just goes back and nothing changes. If I come back down again and say I want to delete the mask, it simply throws it away. So I don't see anything. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Finally, if I throw this away and say apply the mask, this is a destructive move. It's no longer being hidden. Those pixels have been thrown away and there's no recovering. This is a destructive move, and there is zero reason to do a destructive move. Now, in some cases, I'm going to go back here. So this has now got the mask back on it. Again, it's still got the white on it. What you can do is, if you need to have this function as if you have thrown the mask away, there are reasons to do that later on. When we get into doing puppet warping and that kind of stuff, there'll be reasons to do this. What you can do instead is you turn this whole layer into a smart object. Up to the select menu, up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object, and look what happens. It appears like you have applied the mask. You have not. If you double click on this to open up the smart object, you can see in the image that's inside that protective envelope, I still have the mask. So if I hide the mask and then close this up and save it, I have all the information back in my file again. So doing the smart object way is a way of getting the effect of applying a mask without actually applying it. Does this make sense to everyone, what we just went through? Liam? Oh, no. All of this masking and color with red and all that kind of stuff was never part of the assignment. It was actually part of when we were doing other stuff. I mean, we were filling stuff and all that kind of stuff. If people did it, it was fine. It was, somebody wants to do more than the assignment calls for, I don't care. All right. Shoot. You can't do what? So again, you want to go between 120 and 142. You're at 201 right now. Go down. That's a 150. Stop. That's a 141. Close enough. 231. Two other ones I want to look at really quickly, and then we'll start working on other stuff today. So, Christiana, sorry, I'm not calling you out either, but you just have another file that I want to work on really quick. So, remember I keep telling you guys that you should be using the biggest thumbnails that you can get in both your path palette, in the layers palette, all of that kind of stuff. Because when you take a look at this image right here, you can see something that is not common or not really the way it should be looking. This is actually a problem. If I load this as a selection, I'm going to hover over this, command click to load this as a selection. What you'll see is it's not loaded the figure, it's actually loaded the entire background. Look at where the marching ants are. So if I come over here to actually try to use this guy, I'm going to throw away the current mask. I'm just going to delete it, and then I'm going to add this new selection as a mask. You can see it does the exact opposite. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't then invert this layer mask and get to where you want to get to, but it's better off, in my opinion, to fix the problem to begin with. So if you take a look at this, What you really expect to see with a normally done path is that the background, the area that you want to hide will actually be, or that's outside of your path, will actually be middle gray, and then the area that you want to actually be an active selection if you were to load it will be white. That's not what we have right here. And again, if you're using these really small thumbnails, so I'm going to show you what a really small thumbnail would look like here. That's very difficult to see what's going on there. Sometimes you'll have areas that'll actually inside. So sort of like this area that's inside her arm right here, that's sort of like selected area here. You'll have the body will be correct, but that area will be wrong. Yeah, I mean, you run into all sorts of weird things in here. So I use large panel thumbnails so that I can really see what's going on. But this is where you're actually looking to fix this part. So the first thing you need to do is actually have the path active. Hit the P key to get the pen tool to have all of that part active. And then in this drop down menu up here at the top, it's one of the most confusing actual menus that there is. The names in here, they don't ever make any sense to me. I don't get too caught up in that. What I simply do is I simply look at the different versions of how the path is actually treated. So if I come down to the very first one and I say subtract front shape, you'll notice that absolutely nothing happened to this path. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to come back up again to the same drop down and go down to intersect shape. Again, nothing happened there. Command Z to undo that. And then finally this last, exclude overlapping shapes. And again, I don't have any change in here, so I know I need to actually make all these points active. So I'm going to select the white selection tool, click and drag across the entire path. Now all of my points are active, and I'm going to go through that same exercise again. Hit the P key to get the pen tool, click exclude shape, and all of a sudden now this is exactly the way a pen tool should look. The area that you want to hide is at middle gray. The area you want to be active is this white. Now when I load this thing as a selection, Command click, loads it as a selection. Come back over here. I'm going to throw away this mask so you can see and put on another one. And you can see it's now done correctly. The whole process of doing that, if you take a look at our session 4, which is where we started this whole enterprise, there's a PDF right here that's called Path Components, How Overlapping Paths Intersect. That's what's going on here. The problem with this is it wasn't her outline on the outside of the image. It's when she actually starts to do the area that's in the in between the whole arm that's being surrounded by the arm, and then also the area that's being surrounded by those two straps of leather that are coming. All of that is those multiple paths. You're saying, how are these things supposed to be interacting? And anyway, so this thing will explain all of that to you. But like I say, I don't bother to go in there and try to memorize all of this stuff. I simply go through the options until I get the path to look the way I know it should actually look. Make sense? Okay. And then one final thing I want to show everybody, and this is true not only of path work, this is true of everything. So I want to look at Jared's really quickly. So in Jared's, when you take a look at the path, this part, everything looked great in here. All of that part worked. And this is what I do when I'm looking at these images, trying to figure out what's right or what's wrong. First off, I look to see, is the path correct? This path looks good. Then I come over to the image and I hold down the Option key and I click on just the mask itself so that I can inspect the mask. And then I zoom in on this. And this is what you see in here. So once I see this part in here, you can see that none of this transparency in here, that can't be explained by a path. A path makes selections that are either all in or all out. You can see I've got fingernails here. That can't be coming from a path. But if I click on the path and take a look at it, I can see that the path edges are actually really pretty close on this. So it's not like I felt like, because this also happened, a couple of you actually made a path but then didn't use the path to actually make your selection to do the knockout. You actually used either select and mask or the select subject or one of those other things. My guess here is that what Jared did on this is that he made the path selection. That's how it started, but then I think you refined the edge. And refining the edge is what leads to these things. So a lot of people feel like, well, come on, refine edge. I refined the edge. That's what I was supposed to do. But the truth of it is that refine edge can work really good sometimes, but other times it sucks. It actually makes the image worse. And in this case, it has made the image worse. This part right here, you can see his pen tool work here would have selected this beautifully, but once it got refined, all the bets are off. And so you need to look at the mask by itself and make sure. Look at this. You can see this is all contamination running up in here through the hair. This is contamination running all along the line here. All of this is worse than the path would have been just by itself. Make sense?
Question.
Shoot.
What's the expected time you want us to finish this?
How long does it take?
Yeah,
If you get really good, I know people who can knock this shape out in 2 minutes.
for us.
Say what?
But for us, beginners, what's the expected time?
The expected time is as long as it takes to do it right.
Give me 40 minutes.
Well, then probably it'll take you 20 minutes next time. But how long does it take you to make a selection with your paintbrush? You were talking about this last week, right? So ask yourself, don't you, when you're doing a selection with a paintbrush, you paintbrush whatever and your edge isn't perfect, so then you go from white to black and then you start to repaint the edge to try to refine the edge, and you keep going back and forth and back and forth. How long would it take you to paint the edge on this girl? 40 minutes or longer. The point is that, and I will say this to you, I said this in the very beginning when I was trying to introduce you guys to paths, you're going to avoid this as much as you possibly can, but at the end of the day, this is the best time saver and the most precise way you can make a selection. And nobody believes it, and everybody tries to avoid it, and everybody tries to, oh, I'm going to use the select subject tool, oh, I'm going to use the quick mask tool, the quick selection tool, oh, I'll use all those tools, and you end up endlessly painting shit trying to get a mask that at best is only 80% of the way there. Do not fight it. I'm begging you. Every pro that I know, without exception, will go to the pen tool before any other selection tool in a situation like this. All right. So what I would like to do is also show you how to avoid. The last thing and the mistake that some people made was people orphaned their path. So what happened a lot is that you had, in this case, you had the body image and you had the metal image. And so people made the outline of the body, actually created a layer mask, put the layer mask on there, and then drug the layer mask and the layer of the body on top of the metal. The problem is that you leave your path behind, right? We don't want to do that. So I need to show you guys how you can keep this whole thing connected. It's not just connecting it, it's also working inside your image with the path as well. So I need everybody to grab one of their images, as long as you made one that actually had a path in it. I take that back. Let's do this. Hey Stephanie, are you okay if we use one of your files? Thanks. All right, I need everybody to go to our server really quickly. And I'm going to dump one of Stephanie's files on there, and I need everybody to copy that so we're all working on the same file, please. All right, so it's up on the server. It's got Stephanie's last name right here. Can everybody copy that to your own computer? Don't try to run it off the server. Just make a copy down to your own computer. Can everybody do that for me, please? And then I also need you to open up a separate version of just the metal. So if you go back to our class assignments, our class sessions, go to session number 4. Inside the session number 4 in the assignment folder, there is a copy of the metal file. If you could just open that up, so we've got something separate. Even though the one that's Stephanie's has already got a copy of the metal file in there, I still want to give you something to be able to move shit around with. So copy the Stephanie file from the server. Did you get that down? And then open it up, and then just open up a blank copy of the metal file. So inside the assignment folder of session 4, so that we've got something that we can actually drag around and move around. So if we take a look at Stephanie's file right here, you can see that she did the outline. Her path is actually pretty good in here. That part works great. If we go and take a look at the layers, you'll also see that she's got the metal background in a group that's collapsed. So in this case, she did the correct thing. So for her, and for a lot of people, it was just simple to move the metal background to the image, which kept it all happening inside the body image. So she's got a complete composite here, but she's got it with the path that's already in here. Doing it the other way, if she had simply created this and then done the path work, loaded it as a selection, and then drug it onto the metal, she loses the path. So actually, let's do this. I'll show you how to work. So go to the layers palette of Stephanie's, throw the layer mask away, and simply say delete it. Don't apply it. That's a destructive move. Delete it. It gets rid of it. Go back to her path part. Command click to load her path as a selection. Go back to the layers palette and simply add it as a layer mask. Now in this case, we're missing the head, but the head was never meant to be done with the pen tool. Although the hair is pretty helmet head-like, so it kind of could have been done, but nonetheless, I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about you guys understanding the mechanics of this. So then I can see both of my images. I can see the blank metal layer that's behind mine. Again, this is why I don't use tabbed behavior in Photoshop, but I'm gonna grab the body image here and simply grab the layer and drag the layer on top of the blank metal background. Hold down the shift key to bring it into register, and it comes in, and you can see it's a really big image here. It doesn't really fit the layer. It's all still in there, it just doesn't fit the layer part. But if we take a look at your path palette, it's not there. So if you save this file, you have lost all the pen work, all the path work that you did, you've lost it. That's very different. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. That's very different than taking the entire layer set. So this is the entire layer set right here of the metal background. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to select all of them. So now I've got all of my layers are selected. You can see they're all highlighted. I'm going to come up to the whatever we're calling this thing, the hamburger, the stack of pancakes, the flyout menu that exists right across from the layers palette. I'm going to click on that and say, I want to do a new group from layers, and I'm going to call this metal background. And say OK. And now I'm going to take the metal background. I'm going to go back to Stephanie's really quickly and hide her metal background. I'm going to take the metal background and bring it onto the body image, holding down the Shift key and letting it come in place. And you can see it comes in, it's now above my image. I'm going to click and drag it down below my image. But nonetheless, I've got the metal background in here, and I've still got the path is active right here. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? Simply drag the, so did you make it a group yet? So hold down the shift key and select all the layers for the metal background file. Go up to the little pancake menu on the top right. Click on it, say you want to do a new group from layers. It's just easier to move it as a group than it is to move 3 individual layers. You could do that and name the group, call it metal background. And then drag that metal background group over to your, but hold down your shift key before you let go and it'll center it. You can move it around after the fact. Did that work? Yep, okay. Okay, I'm going to go back at this stage of the game in Stephanie's image. So I'm going to work on Stephanie's image. I'm going to go back in history up to the very top where it says open. So this is where we're going to start with this. I want to show you guys how you can actually do the opposite, how you can actually move this from the body image onto the metal background, but also how to transform this, because the problem we're going to have when we're working with it, well, here, let's do it first. So come into the, so we're working with Stephanie's image right now, already on the background right here. I want you to click on the layer that's actually got the body on it. If you go back into your path palette and you click on the path, you'll actually see that the outline fits this perfectly. So nothing has moved in here. The outline is all still here. That part's working great. So I'm going to go beneath the outline to hide it again. I'm going to click on the layers palette, and now I'm simply going to do a move. I'm going to move the body layer. So the body layer is selected. Hit the V key to get the move tool, or go to the very top of the toolbar on the left-hand side and click the arrows that are crossing each other. That's the move tool. And I want you simply to move the figure over to the left side of the image. Rule of thirds looks better already. But now come back to your path palette and click on it and then activate the path, and you can see that the path no longer lines up with the body. We have now broken that connection. So if I wanted to go back in and adjust the path or to do anything else with the path, I'm fucked. I can't do it. The path no longer matches this. It gets worse. If you hide the body image, so go down underneath it, click underneath it so you don't see it, go back into your layers palette. We're going to actually transform the body right now. So I'm going to hit, if the body's still selected, body layer, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the link between the width and the height up in the options panel, and then use the scrubby slider to make this 50% smaller. So I'm hovering over the H of for height, and I'm simply going to drag it down until it says 50% or close to 50%. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to click on the little check mark up there at the top. So I've now just made my image smaller, but look what's happened to the path as well. If you click on the path again, the path not only didn't move with it, it didn't get smaller either. So this is a horrible problem to have, because again, if you're Patrick and you spent 40 minutes actually building the path, why on earth would you orphan it? And why on earth would you ever let it not be connected to this image? You wouldn't. So to figure out how to fix this, go back to the very in history and Stephanie's image, back to open at the very top. This will bring it back to where this is coordinated as well right now. So this is how you do it. We need to connect the path actually to the layer itself. So to do that, you select the path. So make it active so that you see the little blue outline here. Go back to your layers panel. Make sure that your image with the layer with the body on it is actually active. You see we've already got a layer mask. This is a pixel mask. So you can paint on this mask. We've already done it. We've blurred these masks. We've painted on them. We've run levels on them. We've done all of that kind of. This is pixel. We're now going to actually add the path as another mask, as a vector mask. To do that, you simply click Add Mask again. And what you'll see now is it actually has put another mask on it, and the mask that's on it now is exactly that same color configuration as it is in your path palette. The background, the part that's being hidden, is a middle gray. The active part that's being shown is a pure white. That's how paths will always be. There is no opacity in doing a path. It's either in or it's out. So you get this But anyway, if you hold down your shift key now and click on the middle mask, you can now see this path is now actually the path mask. The vector mask is actually doing the work. It's actually hiding this image. If we zoom in really close to this image, you will also see it's too sharp. This thing hasn't been softened at all. Look at that edge. That's very different than the vector mask. So to see the difference in these two, right now we are going to do a history snapshot of what this image looks like with the vector mask. To do a history snapshot, come over to your history palette. Down at the very bottom, click on the thing that looks like a little camera. If you don't get a dialog box that comes up, you need to let me know, because it means your preferences are not set correctly. So for those of you who did not have it come up, I'm going to cancel out of mine. You need to go to the drop-down menu for history. So the pancake or hamburger or whatever you call that thing on to the right of the history tab. Click on that flyout menu, come down to history options, and click. Automatically create first snapshot is always clicked by default, but you need to add automatically create new snapshot when saving, and you also need to add show new snapshot dialog by default and say okay. Now when you click on that little camera, a dialog box will open up, and we're going to just call this vector mask and say okay. So this is what the image looks like using the path palette, the path to actually do that work. If we now click, hold down the shift key and click on the vector mask, it will hide the vector mask, but now click on the pixel mask and this will come back. And now we'll actually, it's masked again, but now it's using the pixel mask that Stephanie made and that she also softened on that edge. Remember, she feathered the edge. That was another thing a number of you guys didn't do. I'm going to do another snapshot of this. So I'm going to simply click on this and I'm going to call it pixel mask. And say okay. And now you can go up to the very top of your history palette and you'll see you've got two history states. You've got a vector mask state and a pixel mask state. Click on the vector mask and you can see how sharp that edge is. It's too sharp. It looks cut out. If you go, yes. Do you have the vector mask snapshot? Do you have any history snapshot? Is that the one? Do you have the vector mask though in control? Yeah, so this is it. Yes, so do history snapshot. So just click on camera, on vector mask. And say okay. And then we're going to hold down the shift key and click on the pixel one, and then hold down the shift key and click on that one. So now this is now the pixel mask is going to show. And we do another snapshot called pixel mask. So this, and you're good to go. You just go to the very top of your history and click on go back and forth between the two. Guys, this is the easiest way in the world to do complex comparisons. So let's say you've got something in your layers palette and you've got like 6 or 7 layers that you want to turn off and then 6 or 7 layers you want to turn on. You want to do the before and after. You want to compare them. It's really hard to do that just turning off the little eyeballs. But if you make these snapshots of history, then it'll do all of that work for you no matter how complex your states are. So you can see here that this is actually too strong here. It also does it on here on your mask. So what Photoshop realized was an issue with all of this is that theoretically, there's no way to actually soften the edge of a vector mask, but somehow Photoshop has managed to work this in. So if you click on the vector mask, again, you'll know you've clicked on it because it'll have the little white outline that's around it. You actually have a feathering up at the very top. You can actually click on this feather, and when you click and drag that out, it will actually soften the edge of a vector mask. So, but the important thing about this is, regardless of if you do the feathering part on here, is that we've now attached the mask to the layer. So I'm going to double click on the hand to zip back out. So the first move that we did last time with this was to actually move the figure. So I'm going to hit the V key to move the body, and I'm going to drag the body again to the right side, or over to the left side. But look what has now happened. The pixel mask has gone with it, and the vector mask has gone with it. So the vector mask, if you click on it, you'll actually see the, you don't get the outline here, but if you go to your path palette you will see that down below it, that's added this layer 0 vector mask. This is your vector mask. If you click on it, you will actually make it active and zoom in. It should be showing, but it's not. Yeah, if you click on one of the arrows, that you'll see the outline of the vector mask. So anyway, the whole thing has moved with it. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? It gets better. I'm going to double click on the hand. I'm also then going to transform this. So again, I'm working on my layers palette, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the link between the width and height and actually drop your height now, or your width now, down to 50%. I'm just doing the same move we did before. And click on the check mark to say OK. And look what's happened. Your image changed size, your pixel mask change size with it, but your vector mask actually changed sizes as well. If we go back into the path palette, you can see you've got a full-blown vector mask that's sitting down there. If you click on the little white tab, you'll see that all of your points are still intact. So this has transformed the path as well. Make sense? Then finally, if you go back to your layers palette, and click and drag that layer of the body on top of the metal background. Hold down the shift key to bring it in. You actually have brought everything with it. You can see now you have got in the metal background, you have got a vector mask, a pixel mask, you've got a vector mask. If you click on your path palette, the vector mask is sitting right there. This has now been moved over. So as soon as you attach the vector mask to a layer, it'll stay with it forevermore, and you can move it anywhere and you will get the path to go with it. Questions about this? Okay, you can close all of that up. So how many, just a quick question, quick show of hands right here. How many of you are mentally outside right now in 75-degree weather? I'm right there with you, so don't, I'm sorry, what can I tell you? We got to blow through all of this stuff, whatever. I wish we could do this outdoors. We can't. But anyway, I just wanted you to know you're not alone, for what it's worth. Okay, I got through that part. Okay, the couple things that we need to pick up on that we didn't get to last week. And so I need everybody to please do this with me. This is actually an important one. So hang on, it's week 5, I think. Yeah, there's week 5. So I need you to go to your session 5 files, and inside your session 5 files there is a file called Choke and Spread. I need you to open that for me, please. Could everybody find that one? Okay, so if we take a look at this image, so this is actually, again, I used zero selective color. I ran that action to actually build the layer mask for this. It does a pretty good job of this. If you zip in here really close and take a look, you can see that there's spill in her hair. That's not a problem for me. I'm going to fix the spill a little bit later. But if you zoom in on this area right here, you will see that there's this green line that actually circles her entire body. It goes, it goes everywhere. If you take a look, I don't care where you look on this edge, you'll see it all along on the inside right here. There's spill on her glove, but what I'm talking about is a very different thing. It's this green edge that you've got in here. Now, we did not ever get into basically how digital sensors work in this class, but one of the downsides to having how digital sensors work is that there is when a digital sensor, when an image is actually processed, there's an inherent softness that comes into the image. So what happens is with Photoshop, and this is not true just of Photoshop, this will be true of Lightroom, it'll be true of Capture One, it'll be true anything that processes a raw file. What happens is that there's inherent softness that happens when a file is demosaicked. If you know what that means, great. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. You don't need to know what it means. But basically what happens is that Photoshop then It's a processing of the image that causes this softness. Photoshop and all of the other programs that actually process raw files actually then go in and do a little bit of sharpening to actually overcome that softness when it's processed. So what it does is, all these processors, they go in and they try to find edges, and when they find an edge, they actually run an algorithm that increases the contrast of that edge. And so contrast is basically making the lighter parts of the image lighter and the darker parts of the image darker, and this happens right along that edge. So what's happened here, the reason you see this green line that surrounds all of this is that because the contrast has been run on this green edge, the green is actually darker than the green background of the green screen. And so when you do the knockout, it does not pick up this edge because this green is not the same green as the whole rest of the field. It's been made more contrasty. If you zoom in here really close and take a look, you can hold down your shift key and click on the mask. It will actually get rid, or it'll just hide the mask temporarily. But now if you zoom in really close to this, you can actually see that edge. Look at the green here. I'll keep zooming in on this. You can see how much darker that green is right there than it is in the field in the background. This does not happen because somehow my green background lighting was fucked up. It's not. This happens because this edge has been sharpened in just the processing to bring the raw file into a usable state inside of Photoshop. Does that make sense what's going on here with everyone?
It can be fixed in camera removal, right?
This?
Yeah.
How?
I remember there was a tool that was to remove those lines.
No, you're talking about chromatic aberration, and this is not chromatic aberration. This is actually now a problem with how the layer mask was actually built. But we can still fix it. So to fix this, we're going to actually do what they call choking and spreading. So you guys probably will remember, some of you will remember, when we were in the Select and Mask workspace, there are all sorts of tools in the Select and Mask workspace that you can use to shift edges or to do contrast, to do all of that. To see what I'm talking about, click on the layer mask. Make sure that the layer mask of this body is selected. Come up to the Select menu, down to the Select and Mask workspace. And the tools that I'm talking about are all of these right here, these global refinements. The smooth tool, the feather tool, the contrast tool, the shift line tool, all of those things in here are ways to control that edge. The problem with this is that you don't have the kind of, these are global. This is like trying to drive a carpet tack with a sledgehammer. That happens to the entire image. There's no partial part of it. There's no correcting it. There's no going one way or another. There is contrast only, but that's a positive move. There's not a lessen contrast. There's no way to reduce contrast. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with this. That's why I don't ever use any of these global adjustments here. I do everything on the image once I'm actually inside the image. Also, this has only existed, the Select and Mask workspace is only like 4 or 5 years old. People who've actually been doing this knockout work have been doing it for decades, and we did it using controlling that edge in a completely different way. So I'm going to show you guys what I think is a much better way of controlling this and not doing it here in Select and Mask. So you can cancel out of that. So I've still got this green edge that I need to fix. The first thing that you need to do in this is make a history snapshot of what this image looks like before we do anything to it. So I'm going to come over to my image. I'm going to click on the very top layer, the very top part where it just says open, my first history state. And I'm going to click on the little camera at the very bottom, and a dialog box will open up, and I'm going to call this pre-choke. And say OK. So now we need to open up another file so that you guys can sort of see exactly what I'm doing here. So I'm going to build just a synthetic file. It's just so that you guys can see the process and understand how it is I'm going to actually choke or spread this image right here. So I'm going to hit Command N to bring up a new dialog box. I'm going to do my units. Again, I use the legacy dialog box for new. If you're using that, follow along with me. If you're using the new one, all you want to do is make sure it's 8 by 10 inches and 300 pixels per inch. So I'm going to change my drop-down menu to inches. My width is going to be 10. My height is going to be 8. My resolution is going to be 300 pixels per inch. And then it is going to be RGB 8 color, RGB color 8-bit, and white is my background. I'm just going to say okay to that. It basically just creates a new blank image for me right here. Are we good on this part? Okay. I'm going to add a new blank layer on top of this. Is that what I'm going to do? Yeah, I don't ever remember how I do this exercise, so sorry about that, guys. I'm going to create just a square in the middle of this. So I'm going to click on the rectangular marquee tool. When you do that, at the very top, make sure that the feathering of this is set to 0 and also the style is normal. And then simply click and drag out just a rectangle sort of in the middle of your image. So we've got marching ants going. We need to put guidelines on this so that you can actually see where the changes that we're going to make in this. So to do guidelines on this, click on if your rulers are not showing, they have to be showing in order to get guidelines. If your rulers are not showing, go to your view menu, come down to put a check mark right next to rulers, and then up to, you'll get a ruler on the left side and another one on the top. Click on the ruler on the very top and drag down. It'll give you a guideline, and the guidelines will snap to your marching ants. So get close to the one on the very bottom. It'll snap to the guideline and let go. I'm going to click and bring another one down from the top so that I have the top line as well. And then on the ruler that's on the left-hand side, I'm going to click and drag over. And then I'm going to do the same thing a second time. So basically, I've got guidelines that are boxing my image here, which is actually what I want to have going on here. Does this make sense to everybody, what's going on? Does everybody have this? Then I'm going to fill this black square right here with, I want to fill it with black. Black is my background color right now. So again, I can hold down Command Delete and it will actually fill it. And then hit Command D to deselect. So then finally in doing this, I'm going to merge this square down into my white field. So with the square, actually, that layer selected, hit Command E, and it will actually merge it down. So now, what is your background color? Yeah, so it filled it with white. So if black is your foreground color, hit Option, Delete, and it'll fill it with the foreground color. Did that work? You still have the selection going?
Yes.
So what's your foreground color? Okay. You still got a selection going. That part's right. So if you hold down the Option key and hit Delete, so Option Delete, it'll be foreground. Option and Delete. Option and the Delete key. All right, so did everybody now have this thing? So you now have got a black, yes. So you need to merge it down. So Command E merges down. Did that work? Okay. So we need to zoom in and take a look at this really quickly and sort of see where the white actually meets the black. So I'm going to come into this corner right here. And you can see my guidelines are right on here, but you can also see I have only got 2 tones in this. I've got white and I've got black in here. If you look at your infill palette, you'll see that if you take your infill palette and you look at this, you'll see that I'm 0, 0, 0 in the black part, but the minute I hit the white part, I go to 255. So I have no tones of gray in here at all. I've only got black and white in here. To do choking and spreading, we need to introduce gray values between these two. The way you do that is to blur it. So come up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. Shoot. Yeah, so select the top layer, just hit Command E and it will merge down. Good? All right, so up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and I'm putting in a Gaussian blur. This 3 actually looks pretty good to me. This is something that I can't give you a definitive number. It's never going to always be 3. It could be 5. It depends on the resolution of your image. The higher the resolution of your images, the higher this number is going to have to be. But what I'm trying to do is introduce tones of gray that are going from black to white. So if we zoom in, way in on this guy, you can see that that's actually what I've got going right here. Again, I'm hovering over the background down here in the very bottom here in this edge, and you can see I've got 0, 0, 0. But as I start to move up through this, I'm looking at my info palette. I'm in the 40s here, I'm in the 60s, into the 70s, up into the hundreds, the 150s. Now I'm getting up into the 180s, then I'm in the 190s, now I'm in the 200s, and then finally I go up to the 255. So I've introduced this whole range of gray tones between the black and the white. Is this making sense to everybody, and is this happening for everybody? Pablo, did you actually blur the image? Gaussian blur. And how much did you put in pixel-wise? And say okay. And you get no blur? Okay, hang on. Hang on. Did you guys merge all of this into a single layer? Right, so that's looking pretty blurred right there. It doesn't say okay. Yes, if you've got a high-res image, that 3 won't do anything for you. So if you need like 600 pixels per inch, your resolution is too high. You get a few tones of gray, but not much. So again, it all has to do with the resolution. Everybody else got this to got the blur in between it, right? Okay, great. So now I'm actually going to say okay to that. And now I'm going to run levels on this image. So again, you do not want to do this with an adjustment layer. You want to actually do this using the levels adjustment at the very top. So we don't add an adjustment layer here. Instead, it's up to the image menu, adjustments, and levels. This is what we've used for all of the work that we do to build masks. So again, the keyboard shortcut for this is Command L. So I'm not going to use all those drop-down menus. I'm just going to do Command L. And then what you'll see here is that you've got an image that's really dominated by whites and blacks, and then there's a few little blips on this histogram in the middle. Those are the tones of gray that we've actually got. But now think again, what does levels really do? Levels remaps tone. So what I'm going to say in using this level is that I'm going to control what happens to all of those grays that we put in the middle. This isn't going to change the black, and it isn't going to change the white. That's not the goal in this. The goal in this is to actually change the middle tones of gray in the middle. So if we actually take the shadow slider at the very bottom and you start to drag towards the right, look what happens to your image. What this is doing is it's saying I'm taking those darker tones of gray and I'm making them black. So for you, it appears that the image is actually moving. But the truth of it is, what we're really just doing is saying we just want those middle tones of gray to be black. If you continue to crank this up, go past the middle, what you'll now see is that that black is now extended beyond your original line here. This is causing the black area to grow larger than the original selection. Again, remember your guidelines are showing you your original selection. This is called a spread. You are actually making, so we're going to do this to a mask, and so you're controlling the edge of that mask. You're actually making that mask larger. This is a spread. If you pull that slider all the way back down to 0 and then grab the highlight slider and start to pull it towards the middle, you will see that what it's doing is it's making those layers of gray, those gray layers, white. Again, it doesn't seem that way, but it is choking your mask. It is now making your mask smaller. Look again, the mask doesn't touch those lines anymore. Does that make sense what's going on here? So that's what choking and spreading is all about. If you have an image right here, you can see also in this image right here, so I've choked it down. It's actually smaller. But you'll also see this, that the edge has still got softness in it, right? If you need to sharpen that edge up, you can grab your shadow point slider now and start to pull it into the middle, and you can see you can control the sharpness or the contrast of that edge. This is what you cannot do in those dialog boxes inside the select and mask thing. We can't shift this, we can only increase the contrast of this. This is allowing me to do both. I can either spread or choke, and then I can affect the contrast on it as well. Yes? No, and it has nothing to do, that's just an illusion. That's somebody lying to you. If they try to sell you a bridge, don't buy it. Yes. Oh, anyone else? All right, so is this making sense what's going on? Okay, so this is how we're going to control it. You can hit cancel out of here. You can throw this file away. You don't need to save it. So we're back to this edge on the girl. So I'm going to zip back out where I can actually see this. And I'm going to do it based on her shoulder. You don't want to be zoomed in too tight on this, guys. You want to actually be able to see this edge work here pretty well. So I've already got a snapshot of what this looks like before I choke it. It's called pre-choke. I am now going to actually choke this thing. So make sure that you've got the mask is selected. So you can see I've got the brackets around my mask. And our first move is here is to go up to the filter menu, come down to blur, and down to Gaussian blur. And so our first move is to make the problem worse. I've got 6 on here, and that's way too much. So people ask me all the time, well, how much should you be putting on here? Again, there's no definitive answer to this. All I can tell you is that we're going to start this process right now. I'm looking at that 3 pixel. The 3 pixel seems a little down to me. I'm going to try 4 instead. 4 feels a little bit better to me. But here's the trick. If we go through this whole process and try to do the choke on this, and it doesn't work, or it's too soft, or I didn't put in enough tones of gray, so I couldn't really get rid of all the green, whatever happens, just go back in history and start the whole process over and either do more of a blur or less of a blur. Does that make sense? So again, I can't give you the figure. There's no action that I can run that'll actually do this. This is just one of those kind of things where you're going to have to go in, try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you go back in history and you do it all over again, picking other values. We good? But 4 seems about right to me. Again, I do this a lot, so I have sort of a sense of what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So here, watch my screen. Don't do this, but watch my screen. I'm going to show you the same thing on my screen. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that, but I'm going to show you just the edge. So this is what my mask currently looks like right now. When I do that blur, that's what happens. So I'm introducing all of these levels of gray here that I can then push to either white or black, ineffectively either choking or spreading my mask. So that's good on that. I'm still working on my mask layer. Let me zip back out a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm actually going to choke this thing. Command L to bring up your levels dialog box. Again, we are running levels on the layer mask. And I'm going to do exactly what we did before. I'm going to grab the black. I don't ever remember whether I moved the black one or the white one. I grab one and I start to move it. And if it does what I want it to do, that's great. If it doesn't, then I know I've grabbed the wrong one. So I'm going to grab the black point slider and I'm going to start dragging it towards the middle, and look at your guy is beginning to shrink. Now it's getting rid, it's actually, again, it's choking the mask, it's making the mask smaller, and that's why it's like coming in on the mask is actually being made smaller. So it's getting rid of that edge, but it also, if you look at the very top up here of her shoulder, it's also really soft up in that edge up in there. So I'm getting rid of it, but I'm also, my edge on here is too soft. It looks like it's been actually cut out with a sponge. So I'm going to tighten it up by grabbing the white point slider. Again, this is going to allow me to do contrast on this edge. So I'm going to grab the white point slider and sort of push it back, and you can see that edge is beginning to tighten up. Now when you do that, you're also bringing back some of the green is coming back in. So I need to grab the black point slider and hit it in a little bit harder so that I get rid of that guy. But now I've actually got a good edge on here. If you use your preview check mark, you can turn this on and off. You can see this is what you're doing. You're basically choking this mask, and you're doing it all over the image. This is so much better. So if you want the same numbers as I had when I actually did a softness of that mask of 4 pixels, my layers part on here for the shadow, it would be 165. For the highlights, it'll be 221. This looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. However, before you do anything else, make a history snapshot of this. Nothing else. The second you hit that Levels OK button, click on the little camera at the very bottom of your layers palette, and you want to call this post choke. And say OK. So now if you take a look up at the very top of your history palette, you can see I've got a history state of when my image opened. I've got a history state of my image like before it got choked, and I've got another history state of my image when it's like after being choked. So in this part right now, you could conceivably go back in history down at the history states. You don't want to pick any of these states independent. If you pick a state here independent, you'll lose all your history states that are below it. But you can click on the little boxes to the left of these states in order to paint using your history brush. So what does that really mean? Well, if we go back to your open state on your image, you'll see it brings back your entire the entire part of the image here. That solid green line is on that. But if I click next to the post choke state, the little square that is to the left, so again, this little square right here, click on that. Do not select the post choke state. You simply want, right here you can see this image is not what it looked like post choke. If I click on the state, it actually does the choke. I don't want to do that. What I simply want to do here is put my history brush indicator on the left side next to that. Then if we grab our history brush, to get to the history brush, go over to your tool palette, and it's the brush that's right underneath the clone stamp tool. If you click on the flyout menu, you'll either get the history brush tool or the art history brush tool. I'm going to select the history brush tool, and then you can come over your image. It's a brush, so I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. You can control the edge of the brush. In this case, it doesn't really matter. The history state will be controlling it. You do want a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and then simply paint along that edge. And you can see it gets rid of the entire, it'll get rid of that entire part. So it applies the choke to this, because what we're saying is that I want to paint on this mask. What did it look like when I actually did the post choke? If you make a mistake, you can actually put your history marker on the pre-choke state. So bring it up to the, click on the little left box next to the pre-choke state, and you can come back in here and you can paint the green line right back in again. Does this make sense to everybody what's going on? We good on this part? Okay. I'm going to click on the post-choke state, even though I've told you not to do that, just so that you can see. It'll save us some time so we can actually get there really quickly. I'm going to double-click on the hand to zip back out, and what I want you to see is what happens to this girl's hair when we do this. So if I go back to my history brush work down at the history part down in here, you can see I've got a bunch of spill in her hair, but I've also got really feathery hair. When I click on my post-choke state, though, I lose all of that beautiful hair. All of the stuff that made this knockout look good, I've lost in here. So this is the thing that you cannot do in that Select and Mask workspace. So with this setup the way it is right now, I've actually choked the whole body. So if we actually take a look at the image, you can see that all of the choke around her whole body, all of that part has actually been removed, but it also did damage to all of her hair. It actually screwed that part up. So with my history brush in the pre-choke state, again, don't select pre-choke, or you'll get that green line back over her entire body. But with the history brush here like this, I can select the history brush. I'm going to make the brush considerably larger, and I'm simply going to paint this whole area around her head to bring that whole, all of that feathery hair back in here. So now I've got all of that part has come back into this guy. So again, this is something you cannot do with global refinements. Global affect everything the same. But now what I've done is I have choked the body, but I have unchoked her hair. Does this make sense to everyone? If you zip down to her feet, this is the other thing that choking actually goes after that you need to be concerned about. It is in all likelihood clipped part of the bottom of her shoe. So again, I've got a history brush. I've got my pre-choke state is what I'm actually asking for. And I'm going to paint underneath the bottom of this. And you can see it returns part of the shoe, part of the edge of the shoe that is actually, I think, spilled, not that brush part here. I'm going to also look in the bottom of her other shoe over there, and you can see there's just a small amount of the shadow that was on there. It didn't have that green part to it, but it did end up having, it lost part of the bottom of the shoe when I actually choked the image, and now I've actually brought it back. So this image now, the bottom of both shoes is pre-choked, the whole body is choked, and the hair is pre-choked. Does this make sense to everybody what's going on here? That's all right. Okay, so finally, to fix more of this, we need to remove the spill. So the thing is that we've got a smart object right here. Now, we could make another copy of this layer, rasterize it so that I had something that I could actually then paint on, because I can't paint on a smart object, so I can't remove the spill that way. However, there's another trick to removing spill. I'm going to show you that one right now. So if you zip up to the top of her hair, where we do have spill, what I'm going to do here instead is I'm going to add a new blank layer on top of this. So I'm simply going to click on New Blank Layer. Now you remember when we remove spill, typically we set our brush to only do color. but we can actually do an entire layer that's got a blending mode only of color. So to do that, click on the drop down menu for the blending mode of this blank layer we just added, go all the way down to the bottom and pick color. And then also we want to, well here, I'll show you. It'll be easier to show you the fuck up and then how to fix it. So anyway, so I'm gonna hit the B key to get a brush. In the brush key, make sure I'm gonna set it up to a blending, so I've got a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. I'm gonna check the edge of my brush. I'm gonna make sure that it's a soft brush so that I'm gonna bring in this color correction softly. I'm going to hover over her hair. My brush is a little bit big. I'm going to hover over the color of her hair, hold down the Option key and click. That will actually sample the color of her hair. You can see my foreground color is now that sort of like brownish color. And then I'm simply going to start painting on her head, only where it needs to be. Again, don't come in on areas that don't need fixing. But as you'll see, I'm going to continue all the way around the other side of her head. I'm going to sample another color on the other side just to give me some variation. And I'm going to get rid of the rest of the spill. But the problem is that you'll see we not only got rid of the spill on the girl's head, but we also removed all the color on the leaves and all the shit that's on the background right around this. If you actually paint out even further, you can see that it's just, again, it's keeping all the luminosity of the image, but it's changing the color to everything. So I need this to only happen on her head. I don't want this to happen on my background. To do that, you need to actually do what they call a clipping layer or a clipping mask. To do this, you hover your cursor right between the image that we're using to remove the spill and the body image is right underneath it. Put your cursor so it's right between those two layers. Hold down the Option key and you will see your cursor turns into a little square with an arrow that goes counterclockwise, and then click. Yes. So if you got her hair, did you remove the spill? And you got two layers here, right? All you want to do is put your cursor right between those two layers. And then hold down the Option key and you will see your cursor changes into a square with a little arrow that points down. Watch my screen. Don't do this yet. Watch my screen. I'm going to click on this. Watch what happens to that top layer. I'm going to click on this and that top layer shoots over and then puts this little small arrow icon on the arrow. And so what this is doing is it's now using the layer mask of the body to control what we see on the layer that has been clipped to it. Does this make sense, everybody? To see what I'm really talking about, I want to add another adjustment layer above this. So simply click on Add Adjustment Layer. Again, the icon at the bottom of the layers palette that's half black, half white. And come up and say, I want to do a black and white image. And you'll see the entire image goes black and white, which makes sense. But again, if you hover over the line between our spill removal layer and this black and white adjustment layer, hold down the Option key, you will still get that little square with the arrow that goes down, and click. What's now happening is that it is now inherited the mask of the body. So you can see the figure is in black and white and everything else is in color. Using adjustment layers, they actually add that little thing at the very bottom. If you look at the bottom of your adjustment layer, your black and white, you'll actually see that little same icon. It only happens in this. It doesn't happen when you add new layers like the spill removal one, but it will happen here. If you click on this, it will undo that. If you throw this black and white layer away, it's another way to get rid of it. If you want to undo the clipping for any reason, hover over the intersection, the line where the two layers touch, hold down your Option key and click, and it will unclip it. And you can see it brought back all that color spill removal in the background that I don't really want. Make sense? Are we good on this part? Okay, I'm going to do one more thing in here. I'm going to go ahead and clip that again. We're going to do a quick thing on simple shadows, guys, and then we will take a break. So, also there's more spill work that you can do. I'm going to click on the spill layer here again, hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to sample the color of her shoes. So again, holding down the Option key, you can remove the spill that's on her boot, that's on the back of the boot. that's running up along the inside of her thigh. She's actually got spill that's right in the middle of her crotch. You can remove that. It's the choking on the mask actually got rid of a lot of it on her body. There's still spill that's on the glove, so just touching up a little bit more there to clean those sort of things up. But now at this stage of the game, I actually want to anchor this girl in this space. If you actually double click on the hand, you'll see she's basically floating there. This doesn't look like a real composite, does it? No, it doesn't at all. She's just floating there. It's this cutout that we just laid on top of this. What's missing here is the shadows to anchor it. So two things. You're gonna not see this on the video recording, but you guys will, or you may not even hear it, but anyway, but I'll be back for shadows. Anyway, how do you anchor something in space? So, your two best things, your two best friends actually anchoring this figure into this space or any composite is number one, shadow. If she was actually casting shadows onto that background, it becomes far more believable. So that's going to be the first thing that we actually go after. But in your compositing, something else you're always looking for, again, I do a lot of compositing, something else you're always looking for is there something in my background that I can put on top of my image? So what does that really mean? So I'm the composite. This room is the background. I'm the figure you're putting into it, right? And you stick me here like this, right? I'm just floating on top of this thing. If you gave me some shadows in here, that might help anchor me to the background a little bit. But what about this?
You said it, you said visually, not really.
Does that look real at all?
No.
Well, I want it to look real. That's what I'm talking about, right? So, but this is a background element, and all of a sudden, part of me is behind the background element. That fixes me into the image. And the more things, the tricks like that you do, the more successful your compositing will ultimately be. Make sense? So really quickly, we're going to do shadows on this one. You can do a little bit of background on top of. So for instance, I might be able to take a little bit of this fern leaf and actually put it on top of her boot, but that's for another day. So I'm going to do this just using, I'm not going to use my tablet for this. I'm going to use just my trackpad for this part. So the first thing we need to do is, where do shadows go? Shadows always go between your figure and your background. That's why this whole order layer stack here matters. Because if I do something that, if I put a shadow on top of the figure, shadows don't happen. She cannot cast a shadow on top of herself. She can cast a shadow on the background, but she can't cast one on top of herself. Does that sort of make sense? So where do I put this? Shadows always go between the two. So if you click on your background layer and then simply add a blank layer on top of this, this is where our shadows are going to go. So if I hit, I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. If I'm going to hit just the B key to get a regular brush, and I'll show you what I mean by this. I'm going to go ahead and make this a relatively big brush right here. And black is my foreground color. I'm simply going to paint across black. You can see it stays underneath my figure and then actually on top of my background. This is where you want your shadows to be. Now there's a lot of people who will do this. They will actually put their shadows on the very top like this, and then they will clip it, or they will add another layer mask on the top. I find this really, really, really wrong. So now what's happening is that it's actually then showing only on the background. So then you would have to put in a layer. So instead of clipping, that won't work. So I'm going to undo the clipping. So then I'm going to load my layer mask as a selection, put it on the background up here at the top, add it as a layer mask, and then invert the layer mask so that, who the fuck wants to do that? Simply put your shadows underneath the figure on top of your background, you'll be fine. So I'm going to throw all of that away. I'm going to go back, click on my background layer, add a blank layer that's on top of this. So the best shadows, there are people who are really good at painting shadows. Anybody in here an illustrator or a painter or any of that kind of person? So if you guys are, paint your shadows. If you're comfortable with doing that, that's great. I'm horrible. Every time I try to paint a shadow, it looks so bad. So I don't ever paint shadows. I create them in Photoshop. So I'm going to show the rest of you people how to do this shit. Because unless you're really good at painting this stuff, whatever, it never is going to look real. Okay, So to paint shadows, you use the gradient tool. So if you hit the G key, it stands for gradient. You can also find the gradient pretty much right in the middle of your tool stack right here. It's kind of right in the middle. It's that square. Some people, if the click out drop down for the alt in there is the paint bucket tool or the 3D drop tool. I don't know what the 3D drop tool is, but if you have a paint bucket there, change it to the gradient tool. Photoshop has now changed how gradients work. So if you take now a look up at your options menu at the very top, you will see in the drop down menu you can do gradient or classic gradient. I'm going to actually ask you guys to do classic gradient right now. The advantage to the new gradient tool is that it keeps your gradients editable. That's not what we want for this. So it only will get more confusing. So I'm going to ask you to go to the classic gradient for this kind of work. Then in terms of the type of gradient, I want to make sure you have black as your foreground color. So hit the D key to get your colors to default to black and white. If black is your background color, hit the X key to make it your foreground color. That way all the previews that we get of gradients will actually be correct. Then up at the very top in your options palette again, there's a drop-down menu for the kind of gradient that we want. Click on that, you'll get a drop-down menu. Inside the drop-down menu, these are a set of pre-made gradients. I want you to go to the one at the very top that says Basics. And then in that, there are three icons. The one in the the one that's on the far left-hand side is foreground to background color, so going black to white. The one that's in the middle is foreground to transparent, which is what we're going to use for shadows. And then finally, the last one that's all the way over is simply black to white, irrespective of what your foreground and background colors are. We're going to do the one in the middle, foreground to transparent. Click on that. Then finally, in the type of gradient that you want, there's 5 different settings on here. To see what these look like, click on the very first one. This is a linear gradient. And then you can simply come down to your image and click and drag across and let go. And it's just, again, black to transparent. That's what's going on in here, but it does it in a linear fashion. Hit Command Z to undo that. The next version is the second one. Again, the second icon on the very top type of gradient is a circular gradient. Now if you click and drag over, it just does a circle that goes from black to transparent. Command Z to undo that. The next one over is supposed to be a cone looking inside of a cone. So it doesn't ever really seem that way to me, but nonetheless, that's what this is supposed to be about. Command Z to undo it. The next one down is a reflected gradient. If you drag from top to bottom, it's easier to see what it actually does. This will go from, and I'm going to move it here really quickly, so hang on. This will actually go from background color to transparent back to background color. And then finally, the last one on here, this one, if you click and drag it out, it's supposed to, well, you can't really see it on the figure here. I'll click and do another one here. It's supposed to be, imagine you are inside like a tower building and you're on the first floor and there's just 4 walls that go straight up. As they tend to go up higher and higher and higher, they converge because they're getting further away from you. That's supposed to be what this gradient is based on. Command Z to undo that. I'm actually only going to use the circular gradient, so I'm going to hit Command Z again. So to have this set up correctly, classic gradient, again, the type of gradient you picked is foreground to transparent, and then you're clicking on the second from the left, the circular gradient. Everybody good on this part? Okay. So we're going to come over on the image. Again, I'm working on this. I'm going to double click on the name of this layer and call it Shadow 1. And then I'm going to come down to my figure and I'm going to get near her boot. It doesn't matter really where you do this. I'm going to simply click and drag out a little bit. And you can see it puts a small little gradient out on here that goes from black actually to transparent. If you turn off your background, it's maybe easier to see what it really looks like. So this is just a circle, very dark in the center, and then it fades out. And this really helps us do our shadows. So I'm going to leave my background off for a little bit so you can sort of see what it is I'm actually doing here. But I'm working on this shadow number 1. Hit Command T immediately. This will bring up the transform dialog box because we need to transform this shadow so that it looks like something that really would be a shadow underneath her shoe. So with the handles out here to control it, if you click on the bottom handle in the middle and bring it up, you can see you're flattening this thing out to make it more pancake-like. If you hit Command Z to undo that, instead, you don't want to only flatten the bottom, you want to flatten bottom and top at the same time. So before you click and move that tool, the handle on the bottom, hold down your Option key, and now when you do it, you will see it will actually do the top handle in as well. So I'm going to bring this in to flatten this whole thing out a little bit. This is going to be a shadow that goes actually under 1 foot. So I'm going to start with the foot here that's actually got the high heel that's actually showing on it. You can rotate your shadow now. So if you bring your cursor outside the bounding box, you can actually, you'll get a double-headed arrow. You can rotate your shadow, and if you click inside the box, one thing to be careful about, when you click inside the box, if you get too close to the anchor point, it will grab the anchor point and you'll move the anchor point instead of moving the box. I want to move the box, so I'm going to stay away from the anchor point in the center, but you do need to be inside the box to do it. If you're on the outside of the box, you can only rotate, but on the inside of the box, you can click and you can drag this tool, and I'm going to try to actually put it so it goes right underneath her shoe. And I'm also going to zoom in now and take a look at what's really going on in here. So I've got this thing down, it's actually sitting. I want the darkest part to be under her shoe. I'm also going to unrotate it a little bit so it's more even with just the bottom part of her shoe. And so this part seems to be working for me. If you're moving your shadow and you're using your trackpad or your mouse and it jumps on you, you don't get enough precision, you can use your arrow keys to slowly tap stuff in. So I'm just using my up arrow key to just nudge that shadow in a little bit right here. This looks pretty good to me right now, so I'm going to say OK by clicking on the check mark. Now, this shadow is not finished, because the problem that I've got with this shadow is that, number one, there would be no shadow in front of her shoe. The light is coming from the front. This shadow that's right here in the front, this whole area right here, this would not exist. There's nothing to explain that. Also, the shadow that goes really far in the back here probably wouldn't exist either. So your next move in doing these shadows is to hit the E key for an eraser. In the eraser, for the setup on your eraser, click on your drop-down menu. I'm going to make my eraser about a 50% hardness. I want to be able to control the edge, but I don't want it to be totally soft. So I'm going to do a 50% hardness on this. The type of eraser that you want is a brush. I'm going to leave it at 100% opacity, but I'm going to drop the flow down to like a 4 or 5%. And the reason I do that is this allows me to scrub my shadows in. At this point, I am going to go to a tablet. You guys don't need to right now because we're going to take a break in 8 minutes. But if you do have your tab at hand, I know, right? Third time's the charm. If you do have your tablet, you can actually use it right now at this part here. So I'm going to do this blind. Typically I'm doing this, I'm actually looking at the background at the same time, but I'm going to do this blind right here because I want to make sure you guys understand what it is I'm talking about. So I'm going to simply start scrubbing on this to erase this shadow, to get rid of the part that's actually on the in front of her body that would never be there. There's also a little part right there in front of her, her toe that would never be there. I'm going to leave the bottom part pretty much as it is, but I am going to try to knock off a little bit of the shadow in the back and also a little part in the background right here, and I'm going to get rid of all of that part. Then I'm going to turn on my background to see if this actually helped me out. And if you turn your shadow on and on now, you can actually see that this is beginning to anchor this in her background here. But now once I've got the background showing, I realize that my shadow is too heavy, it's too thick. You can continue to transform this. So I'm going to hit Command T to transform again. Hold down the Option key and click on the bottom one to actually narrow it down. So I'm compressing this a little bit, and then I'm going to move it slightly under her shoe there, a little bit more like that, and that looks better to me. So this is going to be the anchor that I use for the first one. However, shadows work we get into doing complex shadows next week or the week after. Shadows work differently. There's different strengths depending on where you are. This would be called a direct shadow. It's right underneath her shoe. Her shoe is only a ½ inch or a ¼ of an inch from the rock underneath it. It's incredibly dark, dense shadow. But once we start to move out to the shadow that like her body is casting on this entire rocks, that kind of stuff, that shadow is not going to be anywhere near as dark. So you realize that you need to start making shadows sort of progressively. You can't do them all at once. So I am going to drop the opacity of this back because the shadow's actually a little too dark under there. And I'm going to keep it right around an 80% seems good to me on this one. I'm going to click and add a new layer above this first shadow 1. I'm going to double click on it and call it shadow 2. G key to get the gradient tool, click and drag out. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Hold down the option key, compress the shadow. Also drag it in left to right. We're compressing it all the way around. Click in the middle of my box, drag it over to her other shoe, kind of kick it up to the bottom right here. If the shadow appears, if the transform lines are in your way and you want to be able to see it without the anchor point and without the transform, hit Command H, which will hide. The first time you hit Command H in Photoshop, it will offer you the option of hiding extras or hiding Photoshop, the program itself. You want to pick extras. Extras are things like guidelines, our transform lines, anchor points, all these non-printing characters, the marching ants in a selection. Those are another thing that'll actually hide. If you hit Command H again, you will realize that it's all still there. You didn't move it, you didn't get rid of it, you simply hit it. So again, if we're trying to make those sort of nuanced judgments, Command H, you can still use your up and down arrow keys to actually bring it in. So I feel like mine's in a better position right now. Command H will bring that back, and then I'm simply going to click on the check mark. Hit the E key immediately and clean up your shadows. There would be no shadow on either left side or right side. It only would be under her shoe. So now if we turn this shadow on and off, you can actually see she is starting to get anchored into this space. If you double click on the hand, this is a completely different vibe of what's going on with her in this space. Now, there's other things about this that are off. The color matching is off, so I'm not saying this is a complete composite. We will get to that in a couple of classes later from now. But you can see if you simply turn both of these shadows off by just dragging here. Here she's just floating in space. Here she's actually standing on the rocks. We're going to do one last shadow on here. So again, I'm going to click on add a layer mask. I just add another blank layer. I'm going to double click on it and call it shadow 3. G key, click and drag out. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to make a shadow for her entire body on this. So holding down the option key, click to actually crush this. But in this case, I'm actually going to pull my shadow wider, and then I'm going to bring the whole thing down. You see what had just happened to me? I wanted to grab the entire interior of my shadow and move it, but I got too close to the anchor point. That's the anchor point, and that's what's actually moving, and I don't want that guy to move. So again, it keeps going to that. So I'm just going to drag and pull this guy down. Hold down the option key again to crush this a little bit more. Pull it down again. That seems relatively good for me right now. It's going from both one foot to the other foot. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. The E key immediately to erase all of the shadow that's on either side of her, because again, this shadow would be coming straight down. I wouldn't have anything that's on either side. I can also come across the front to narrow it down a little bit, but then you really need to drop the opacity of this guy. So I'm kicking this back and back and back and back and back. And you'll say, well, that doesn't look like there's anything there at all. But if you turn this shadow on, I'm down to a 35%. If you turn it on and off, you can see that there's major shadow that's actually happening there. This is how you build believability into your composites and your shadows. Questions about this? Okay, I'm going to say that this is just 3 o'clock. Make it a hard 10, guys. Be back at 3:10, and we'll jump into retouching today. Is that calibrator still going around? Is everybody who needs that thing getting it and using it? It's for the M1. That's why I've got it. The other ones don't work with the M1. This one does. Does it work with anything? Okay, so it works with any. So the one that's going around will do any Mac.